A terrified alien in a human's hands. Tyla had always heard stories about humans, monsters who devour weaker species, ruthless predators who show no mercy. She had never seen one before, not until today. She lay on the cold metal floor of a human ship, her wrists tied behind her back, her breathing shallow. Fear crawled through her veins like poison. The room was dim, the walls smooth and metallic. A single light flickered above, casting shadows that made her feel even smaller than she already was. The battle had been over quickly. Her people, the Vulora, were not warriors. They were traitors, diplomats, weak in body but strong in mind. Yet the humans had captured her without effort, without hesitation. Now she was alone, surrounded by the very creatures she had been raised to fear. The door hissed open. Tyla's heart pounded as she tried to sit up, but the restraints on her wrists made it difficult. A tall figure stepped inside, his silhouette broad and powerful. She shrank back, her breath hitching. The human stepped closer. His boots thudded softly against the metal floor, each step making her body tense. She could smell him. It wasn't an unpleasant scent, strangely clean, with a hint of something sharp, like metal, and something she couldn't name. He crouched down in front of her. Piercing blue eyes met hers. Tyla froze. The human male studied her with an expression she couldn't understand. His face was strong, his jaw sharp, and his short brown hair was slightly messy. He didn't look like a monster, but neither did a predator before it struck. His hand moved. Tyla flinched, expecting a blow. But instead, he reached into a small pouch on his belt and pulled out a knife. Her entire body locked in fear. This is it. She had heard stories. Humans didn't kill quickly. They played with their food, enjoyed the fear in their prey's eyes. Maybe he would slice into her, make her scream, hear her beg. The human's voice interrupted her thoughts. "You hungry?" Tyla's breath caught. "What?" The human didn't wait for an answer. He turned slightly, pulled out a small metal box, and pressed a button. Steam rose from inside. The scent hit her first, something rich, warm, and strangely pleasant. Food. But for who? Tyla's throat was dry. Was this the test? Would he see if she reached for the food, then punish her for daring to touch a human's meal? She remained still, muscles trembling, her gaze locked onto his hands. The human pulled out a small, thin blade and started cutting pieces of something inside the box. Then he ate a piece himself. Tyla's eyes widened. He wasn't playing with his food. He was just eating. Then, without looking at her, he set the container in front of her. "Eat." Tyla's body refused to move. The human sighed and leaned back, rubbing his temple as if he were exhausted. "Look, I don't know what lies they told you, but I'm not gonna eat you." His voice was deep, firm, but not cruel. Tyla's mind struggled to process his words. Not going to eat me. Was this a trick? A lie? She had seen humans rip through enemies like beasts. They were unstoppable, merciless. Yet this one just sat there. She swallowed hard, her stomach betraying her with a soft growl. The human raised an eyebrow. "That answers that." Tyla clenched her jaw. She would not fall for this. She would not let herself be fooled by a predator's patience. But then he did something that shook her more than anything else. He untied her wrists. Tyla gasped, her body tensing, ready to bolt. But before she could even think of running, the human simply leaned back, resting his arms on his knees. He wasn't afraid of her, because he knew she couldn't do anything, because he was stronger, faster, and yet he wasn't attacking. The food sat in front of her, untouched. The smell was making her dizzy. Tyla slowly reached out, her fingers brushing the edge of the container. She expected him to slap her hand away, to laugh, to reveal the trick. But he didn't. He just watched. Her fingers hesitated before she picked up a piece. It was warm, soft, covered in a strange sauce. She brought it to her lips and hesitated one last time. Then she bit into it. and her entire world changed. It was delicious. Her eyes widened in shock. Her people only ate simple food, dried roots, soft fruits, bland grains. But this was something else. It was savory, rich, with a depth of flavor she had never imagined. She couldn't stop. She took another bite, then another. The human chuckled softly. See, not poisoned. Tyla slowed down, suddenly embarrassed. She had eaten like a starving animal, but she didn't care. She expected him to eat her. Instead, he had fed her, and that terrified her more than anything. Food, but not what she expected. Tyla chewed slowly, her sharp teeth slicing through the tender, flavorful meat. The taste was so overwhelming. Rich, savory, slightly sweet with a smoky aftertaste, that she almost forgot where she was. Almost. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to focus on the human in front of her. He sat back against the metal wall, one knee bent, the other leg stretched out. His blue eyes were locked onto her, watching, but not like a predator. There was curiosity there, maybe even amusement. Why is he watching me like that? Her fingers hesitated over the next bite. She had expected a test, a trick, some cruel game where he let her think she was safe before snapping her neck. That's what humans did, right? But he hadn't hurt her. Not yet. Tyla's gaze flickered to his hands. Strong, rough, with faint scars along his knuckles. Hands that could kill without effort. She had seen what humans could do in battle. She had seen a single human break an enemy's arm, as if it were a twig. And yet, those same hands had just given her food. She set the half-eaten meal down, her hunger at war with her suspicion. The human exhaled through his nose, a soft sound, almost like a chuckle. Something wrong. His voice was deep, steady, with a hint of amusement. Tyla stiffened. She had spent her whole life being careful with her words, with her reactions. Velora were taught never to anger stronger species. But right now, her curiosity was stronger than her fear. She narrowed her glowing violet eyes at him. Why? The human raised an eyebrow. Why what? She gestured to the food with a small jerk of her chin. Why give me this? I thought humans eat their enemies. The human blinked. Then, suddenly, he laughed. Tyla jumped, every muscle in her body tensing. The sound wasn't cruel, wasn't mocking. It was genuine. Warm. Who the hell told you that? He asked, shaking his head. Tyla frowned. Everyone. His laughter faded into an amused smirk. You really think we just go around eating people? She narrowed her eyes further. I've seen what humans do to enemies, how they tear them apart in battle. The smirk faded slightly. He exhaled, running a hand through his short brown hair. Yeah, we fight. We kill. We survive. But we don't eat people. We're not monsters. Tyla wasn't sure she believed him yet. She had seen footage. Humans ripping apart armored warriors like wild beasts, soldiers fighting until their bodies were broken and bleeding. They were too strong, too fast, too relentless. Something about them wasn't natural. But looking at this human now, he didn't seem like a mindless killer. She glanced at the food again. It was still warm, steam curling from the container. Her stomach ached, demanding she take another bite. What if it's poisoned? The human sighed as if reading her thoughts. Without breaking eye contact, he grabbed another piece from the container and popped it into his mouth. He chewed, swallowed, and raised an eyebrow. Happy? Tyla hesitated, then slowly picked up another piece. She bit into it, letting the strange flavors coat her tongue. Silence stretched between them, thick and unspoken. After a long moment, the human leaned back, resting his head against the wall. I'm Daniel, by the way. She blinked. Daniel. His name sounded simple, too normal for a creature as terrifying as a human. She didn't answer. Giving him her name felt like giving him power. But Daniel didn't seem to care. He didn't press, didn't demand. He just stretched out his arms, his muscles shifting under his uniform. "I don't know what they told you about us, but here's the truth. Humans don't kill for fun. We fight because we have to. We protect what's ours." Tyla studied him. His words sounded honest, but humans were good at lying, weren't they? She swallowed the last bite, ignoring the warmth in her chest. She expected Daniel to take the empty container away, to order her back into silence. Instead, he surprised her again. He stood up, stretching, and walked to a nearby console. He tapped a few buttons, then grabbed a small silver cup. He turned back and handed it to her. Tyla hesitated before taking it. It was cool to the touch. She sniffed it carefully. Water. She took a slow sip, letting the cool liquid slide down her throat. She hated how much she needed it. Daniel sat down again, arms crossed over his chest. He watched her, not like a predator, but like someone trying to figure her out. "You don't talk much, huh?" he finally said. Tyla looked away. It wasn't that she didn't want to talk. It was that she didn't know how to talk to him. Her people had been raised to believe humans were nightmares, but this one had just given her food and water. And that terrified her more than anything. Because if humans weren't mindless killers, if they weren't monsters, then what were they? And why did that make her heart race in a way she didn't understand? Understanding the predator. Tyla sat in the dimly lit corner of the humans' quarters, her mind in chaos. She had been here for hours now, maybe even an entire cycle, yet the human had done nothing to her. No beatings, no torture, no mind games. He hadn't even locked her up. Instead, he had fed her, given her water, untied her hands. That wasn't how this was supposed to go. She should have been a meal, or at best, a prisoner in chains. That's what she had been told all her life. Humans were ruthless, dangerous, merciless. But the man sitting across from her, Daniel, was none of those things. Or maybe he was just waiting. The silence between them stretched. Daniel had finished eating a while ago and now sat with his back against the metal wall, arms crossed, staring at her, watching. Tyla couldn't decide if that was worse than being ignored. "You gonna tell me your name, or should I just call you scared alien girl?" Tyla stiffened. She had no reason to trust him. Giving him her name meant letting him in, meant forming a connection. And that was dangerous. She turned her gaze away. Silence was safer. Daniel exhaled sharply. "All right. We'll do it your way." He pushed himself up from the floor, his powerful frame moving with ease. The way he moved, it wasn't just strength. It was efficiency, a predator's grace, honed through survival. He didn't waste movement, didn't show weakness. Tyla had seen it before, in the way humans fought. It wasn't just their raw power that made them terrifying. It was their will. Her people, the Vulora, were small and fragile in comparison. They relied on diplomacy, on their advanced technology, on never being seen as a threat. Humans were different. They didn't submit. They didn't surrender. They fought like they were born for it. Daniel walked to a storage compartment, rummaging through its contents before pulling out a small metal device. Tyla flinched. A weapon. Some sort of control device. She tensed, ready to move, but instead of attacking, he simply pressed a button. A holographic screen flickered to life, displaying a list of names and faces. She didn't recognize any of them. "These are the soldiers who fought in the last war," Daniel said, his voice unreadable. "Hundreds of species, all trying to wipe us out." Tyla's gaze locked onto the screen. The Vulora weren't part of that war. They had remained neutral, avoiding the conflict. But she had heard the stories. The war had lasted for years, an entire coalition of alien species uniting to crush humanity. And yet, the humans had won. Tyla swallowed hard. She had always wondered how. Daniel's finger hovered over one of the names. This guy. He tapped the screen. He survived a direct hit from a plasma cannon. Chest blown open. Guess what he did? Tyla didn't answer. Daniel smirked. He patched himself up with nothing but a med kit and kept fighting. She felt her stomach twist. That was impossible. Daniel tapped another name. This one. She was trapped behind enemy lines. No weapons, no armor. You know what she did. Tyla didn't move. She tore the enemy commander's throat out with her teeth. Tyla's breath hitched. She had heard the rumors. Stories of humans fighting even when they should be dead. Of battles where they were outnumbered 100-1, yet they still refused to fall. She had assumed the stories were exaggerated. But now, Daniel shut the device off. The scream disappeared, leaving only silence. "You want to know why everyone's afraid of us?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. "Because we don't break. We don't stop. You can throw everything you have at us, but we'll still be there, standing, bleeding, fighting." Tyla didn't realize she was clutching her arms until she felt her claws dig into her own skin. Daniel leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "So tell me, scared alien girl." His eyes locked onto hers, piercing. "Do you still think I'm gonna eat you?" Tyla's lips parted, but no sound came out. She didn't know anymore. The predator that protects. Time passed, though she didn't know how long. Daniel didn't speak again. He didn't force her to talk. He just let her sit there. The shit's hum was the only sound in the room. The temperature was warmer than she was used to, not uncomfortable, but different. And slowly, something in her began to shift. Daniel had every opportunity to kill her, every reason to hurt her, use her, make her suffer. Yet he had done none of those things. He had saved her life, fed her, given her water. Tyla thought back to the moment he untied her hands. That wasn't something a monster did. Her people had always believed that humans were merciless killers, ruthless and uncontrollable. But what if they were wrong? What if humans weren't just predators? What if they were also protectors? Tyla clenched her fists. If that was true, then she had a bigger problem than she realized. Because if humans were truly capable of both destruction and kindness, that meant she had no idea what they were really capable of. And that terrified her more than anything else. Unraveling the truth about humans. Tyla sat in the dim light of the ship's quarters, her mind a tangled storm of confusion and unease. Everything she had ever believed about humans was falling apart. They were supposed to be monsters, ruthless, cruel, mindless killers. But Daniel Ross wasn't a monster. He was something far more dangerous. He was kind. Tyla wrapped her arms around herself, staring at the cold metal floor beneath her. The warmth of the meal he had given her still lingered in her belly, and that unsettled her more than anything else. She had expected pain, expected suffering, expected death. But what she had received instead was care. And she didn't know how to handle that. The test of trust. Daniel hadn't spoken in a while. He simply sat there, arms crossed, watching her with that same unreadable expression. Then, without warning, he stood up. Tyla flinched, her body tensing on instinct. Her violet eyes flicked toward the exit, calculating the distance. How fast could she run? Would she even make it? Daniel didn't seem to notice, or maybe he just didn't care. He walked over to a storage unit, pulling something out before tossing it in her direction. Tyla barely caught it, her claws scraping against smooth, flexible fabric. She looked down. It was a jacket, worn, a bit too big, but made of thick, reinforced material. She blinked in confusion. A gift. A disguise. A trick. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You looked cold." Tyla frowned. Was that a joke? Humans weren't supposed to care about things like that. They weren't supposed to be observant of such details. She hesitated, then slowly pulled the jacket over her shoulders. The warmth was immediate, wrapping around her like a protective barrier. And despite herself, she felt safer. It didn't make sense. She wasn't supposed to feel safe with a human. And yet here she was, wrapped in his scent, his warmth, his unexpected kindness. Tyla gritted her teeth, frustrated at herself. This was a trick. It had to be. But then why was he making no demands? Why was he just sitting back down, as if none of this mattered to him? She had so many questions, and for the first time, she found herself wanting answers. Why do you fight? Tyla broke the silence. Why do humans fight? Daniel, who had been checking something on his wrist device, paused. He glanced at her, raising an eyebrow. You're asking that now? She shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I want to understand. He studied her for a long moment, as if debating how much he should tell her. Finally, he leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. You want to know why we fight? His voice was quiet, but there was a weight behind it. Tyla nodded. Daniel took a slow breath. Because we have to. She frowned. You have a choice. His lips curled into a humorless smirk. Do we? Tyla didn't know how to respond. Daniel gestured vaguely around them. The galaxy isn't kind. You should know that by now. Weak species get crushed, conquered, erased. His voice darkened. We refuse to be erased. Tyla swallowed. There was something terrifying about the way he said that, not as a boast, not as a threat, but as an undeniable fact. But you're strong, she whispered. You don't need to fight. No one can challenge humans anymore. Daniel let out a dry chuckle. That's what you think. Tyla hesitated. Daniel's expression hardened. The moment we stop fighting is the moment someone decides we're weak, and the galaxy doesn't hesitate to put the weak in the dirt. There was no anger in his voice, no arrogance, just cold, brutal reality. And that frightened her more than anything, because he wasn't wrong. Tyla had seen it happen before. How many species had fallen? How many civilizations had been wiped out the moment they showed vulnerability? Her own people had barely survived by staying small, staying neutral, staying invisible. But humans, they refused to be invisible. They stood, fought, bled, and refused to fall. And the universe feared them for it. The monsters that feel. Tyla felt something shift inside her. A realization she hadn't wanted to acknowledge. Humans weren't monsters. They were survivors. They fought, not out of bloodlust, but out of necessity. And they weren't just warriors. They were builders, protectors, thinkers. They could destroy, yes, but they could also create. And that made them far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Tyla looked at Daniel again, this time with new eyes. He was strong. He was dangerous. He was the very thing she had been taught to fear. But he had also given her food, water, warmth. He had saved her. And suddenly, she wasn't sure if she feared him anymore. The unexpected desire. Tyla laid awake in the dim glow of the ship's emergency lights. The rhythmic hum of the engines filled the silence, steady and constant. A reminder that she was still here, alive, unchained, untouched. She had expected to be tortured, expected cruelty. Instead, she had been fed, given water, warmth, and even conversation. And now, for the first time since being taken, she wasn't afraid. That realization scared her more than anything. She shifted on the small cot Daniel had set up for her in the corner of his quarters. It wasn't luxurious, but it was a bed, not a cell. The human had given up his own sleeping space without hesitation. Tyla didn't understand him. The way he spoke, the way he moved, it wasn't the behavior of a predator playing with its food. He wasn't trying to deceive her. He was just being himself. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. Because it meant humans weren't just ruthless killers. They were people, watching the predator. Tyla glanced toward the other side of the room. Daniel lay stretched out on a makeshift bunk, one arm behind his head, the other resting on his chest. His breathing was slow, deep, steady. His expression was relaxed, completely at ease. It was the first time she had ever seen a human sleeping. He didn't look like a monster. He looked peaceful, and something about that bothered her. She had spent her whole life fearing humans. The mere thought of them was enough to send shivers down her spine. But now, watching Daniel, she felt something different, something new, something dangerous. Her gaze traced the shape of his form, the way the dim light highlighted the contours of his muscles. He was powerful, yes, but he was also calm, steady, controlled. A predator that didn't attack. A warrior who chose to be gentle. The idea unsettled her. She clenched her jaw and looked away, pressing her back against the cold metal wall. This wasn't right. She shouldn't feel safe near him, and she definitely shouldn't feel curious. The dream that wasn't a dream. She didn't know when she fell asleep, but the next thing she knew, she was waking up to movement. A noise, soft, subtle, not a threat. Her violet eyes flickered open, adjusting to the dim light. Daniel had shifted in his sleep, turning onto his side, his face now angled toward her. His breathing was still slow, but there was something about him that felt tense. Then he spoke. "Don't leave." Tyla's breath caught in her throat. His voice was low, barely a whisper, but it sent a shiver down her spine. He wasn't awake. His eyes remained closed, his expression slightly troubled. Was he dreaming? She had never seen a human vulnerable before. Never seen them without their armor, without their walls. And yet, here he was. For a moment, just a moment, she allowed herself to stare. His face was relaxed, but there was something weary in his features, something hidden beneath the surface. He wasn't just a soldier. He was someone who had seen too much, fought too long. Someone who carried a weight no one else could see. The words he had murmured, "Don't leave." Who was he talking to? Someone from his past. A lost friend. A lover. Tyla felt a strange tightness in her chest. This human, this terrifying warrior who had survived battles and wars, had just revealed something fragile. And for some reason, it made her want to reach out. Her fingers twitched, an unfamiliar instinct pushing her forward. She wanted to touch him, to see if he was real, to understand what it was that made humans so impossibly strong yet unbearably human at the same time. But she stopped herself. She wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Instead, she simply sat there, watching him, listening to his quiet breaths. And for the first time since she had been captured, she wasn't thinking about escaping. A dangerous thought. Morning, if time even worked the same in space, came slowly. Daniel stirred awake, stretching his arms with a deep yawn. His gaze flickered toward Tyla, his usual smirk appearing as he sat up. "You actually slept?" he asked. Tyla hesitated. "Yes." Daniel grinned. "Guess that means you don't think I'm gonna eat you anymore." She flushed, her face heating in embarrassment. "I never thought that." He laughed. "Sure you didn't." Tyla huffed and turned away, crossing her arms. Humans were so frustrating. But the strangest part, she didn't mind. And that realization scared her more than anything else. The betrayal and the escape. Tyla knew she was making a mistake. She had spent her entire life believing humans were monsters, ruthless, uncontrollable, predators that hunted without mercy. And yet she sat in the quarters of one, wrapped in the oversized jacket he had given her, feeling safer than she ever had in her life. That was the mistake. Because she wasn't safe. Not really. Not from her own people. A message in the dark. The ship hummed softly, the faint glow of control panels, the only light in the room. Daniel was busy securing the navigation logs, oblivious to the storm raging in Tyla's mind. Then it happened. A faint beep from the communication panel. Daniel didn't seem to notice, but Tyla did. Because that beep wasn't human-made. Her heart clenched. She recognized the encrypted signal immediately. It was Velora military code, a secret transmission sent from someone on the ship, intended for her people. Her pulse quickened. They were coming. Her people were coming for her, and they were going to kill Daniel. Tyla forced herself to remain still, to breathe, to think. She had been waiting for this moment, hadn't she? She should have been relieved, should have felt a rush of hope, not dread. But instead, a sickening realization hit her. Her people wouldn't just extract her. They would see Daniel as a threat, a human who had captured one of their own, a human who needed to be eliminated. And she didn't want that. She swallowed hard, glancing at Daniel. He was still focused on his work, completely unaware of the danger creeping toward him. She should tell him. She should warn him. But would he even believe her? Did she even want to leave anymore? The Velora don't forgive betrayal. Tyla had a choice to make. Her instincts screamed at her to take the chance. If she aligned herself with her people, she could be back home within the day. Safe, protected. But at what cost? Her people weren't warriors. They weren't strong like humans. They relied on secrecy, on assassination, on striking before the enemy even knew they were there. They wouldn't fight Daniel. They would kill him in his sleep. Tyla's stomach twisted. She couldn't let that happen. She turned to him. Daniel. The ship's alarm blared to life. Daniel was on his feet in an instant, his instincts razor sharp. His hand flew to his holster, his gaze flicking to the main control panel. Shit. Tyla's breath hitched. He had already seen it. A Velora stealth ship, cloaked, approaching fast. Her people were already here. Daniel's expression darkened. He tapped a few commands, trying to jam their signal, but he was already too late. The screen flickered. Then a voice, calm, cold, and unforgiving, filled the room. Velora prisoner located. Terminate all humans aboard. Tyla's blood ran cold. This wasn't a rescue mission. This was a purge. A decision that changed everything. Daniel didn't hesitate. He grabbed his sidearm and turned to Tyla. Tell me the truth. Is this your people? Tyla's hands trembled. Yes. His expression didn't change. No anger, no betrayal, just readiness. Then you need to hide. Now. Her breath caught. What? They're not here to bring you home, Tyla. His voice was steady, sharp. They're here to clean up loose ends. That means you too. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that her people wouldn't do that. But she knew better. The Velora didn't leave survivors. Tyla clenched her fists. She had to choose. Right now. Would she return to her people? Would she stand by them, even if it meant letting them kill the only human who had ever treated her as more than an enemy? Or would she do the unthinkable? Would she betray them for him? The ship shook violently. They had begun boarding. Tyla made her choice. She ran to Daniel's side. Tell me what to do. His eyes widened for half a second. Just half a second. Then he smirked. Try to keep up, scared alien girl. The fight for survival. The doors slammed open. Velora assassins, silent, fast, lethal. Their weapons gleamed under the emergency lights, their glowing yellow eyes locked onto Daniel. They didn't speak. They attacked. Daniel moved like lightning. One moment he was standing still. The next he was a blur of motion. A gunshot. A sharp cry. One assassin dropped before they even knew what happened. Tyla barely had time to react before another lunged at her, a blade flashing toward her throat. She ducked, spun. Her instincts screamed run, hide, survive. But Daniel's voice cut through her panic. Fight back, Tyla. And she did. She moved on reflex, twisting the assassin's own momentum against him, sending him crashing into the metal wall. For the first time in her life, she fought for something other than fear. She fought for him. The ship trembled. Red warning lights flashed across the control panel. Daniel grabbed her wrist. We need to move. Now. Tyla barely had time to breathe before he was pulling her through the corridors. Behind them, more Velora operatives poured into the ship, their movements swift, deadly. Daniel fired twice over his shoulder, then slammed a fist into the security console as they passed through a hatch. The doors sealed shut behind them. For now. Escape pods. Tyla gasped. Daniel shook his head. Already compromised. Tyla's chest tightened. Then how do we get out? Daniel's lips curled into a reckless, terrifying grin. We steal their ship. Tyla stared at him. He was insane. And she was going with him anyway. The impossible escape. The Velora ship loomed ahead, sleek and cloaked in darkness. Its entrance hatch was unlocked. A mistake. The Velora had been so sure this would be an easy mission, so sure that their rescued prisoner would return willingly, that they had left the way open. They had underestimated her. Tyla turned to Daniel. Let's go. And together, they ran. Into the heart of the enemy. Into the unknown. Into the start of something neither of them could have ever predicted. The final choice. Tyla had made her decision. There was no turning back now. The moment she ran with Daniel, fought by his side, and chose him over her own people, she had sealed her fate. The Velora would never forgive her. But strangely, she didn't feel regret. She felt alive. Into the lion's den. The stolen Velora ship was eerily silent. Tyla and Daniel stood at the entrance hatch, staring down the narrow corridors. It was too easy. Too quiet. Tyla's fingers tightened around the stolen pulse rifle she had taken from one of the assassins. This is a trap. Daniel smirked. Obviously. She shot him an irritated look. You're enjoying this. His grin widened. A little. Tyla had never met a creature as maddening as him. Even in the middle of an impossible escape, surrounded by enemies, he was still relaxed, confident. But that confidence wasn't arrogance. It was conviction. And that was why he scared her more than anyone she had ever met. Because when Daniel decided to do something, nothing could stop him. She had heard stories of human determination, but seeing it up close, it was terrifying. And thrilling. The Velora's wrath. They moved quickly, darting through the corridors, following the emergency escape maps built into the walls. Tyla knew this ship. It was Velora tech, designed for stealth and speed. Small, fast, perfect for assassination missions. Which meant there was only one way out. The bridge. Tyla stopped in her tracks. They're waiting for us there. Daniel didn't slow down. Yep. She grabbed his arm. They'll kill you. He finally turned to her, his blue eyes flashing with something unreadable. Not if we kill them first. Tyla hesitated. That was the difference between them. She had been raised to survive, to avoid conflict, to escape. Daniel had been raised to win. Her people fought only when necessary. Humans. They fought because they refused to be beaten. Tyla took a deep breath. Fine. But we do this my way. Daniel raised an eyebrow. You got a plan, scared alien girl. She gritted her teeth. Stop calling me that. He grinned. Then tell me your name. She hesitated, then exhaled sharply. Tyla. Daniel's expression softened, just for a second. Then he nodded. All right, Tyla. Let's do this. And for the first time, she felt like they were truly fighting together. Betrayal runs deep. They reached the bridge, the doors sliding open without resistance. Inside, standing in front of the ship's control panel, was a tall figure, Commander Vekrin, the Velora officer in charge of this mission. His golden eyes flickered toward Tyla. You disappoint me. His voice was calm, but the undercurrent of rage was unmistakable. You were meant to return to your people. Instead, you align yourself with this. His gaze shifted to Daniel, full of disgust. Tyla squared her shoulders. I made my choice. Vekrin's expression didn't change. No, little one. He made it for you. Tyla frowned. What? Vekrin gestured toward Daniel. You think he saved you? No, he's been manipulating you. It's what humans do. They turn the weak against their own kind. They make you believe they are protectors, but in the end, they use you as weapons. Tyla clenched her fists. You're wrong. Vekrin tilted his head slightly. Am I? Tyla hesitated. Doubt crept in, Was she being foolish? Was Daniel really just using her? Then she glanced at Daniel. He wasn't speaking. He wasn't trying to convince her. He was just watching her, letting her decide for herself. That was the difference. The Velora demanded obedience. Humans, they demanded choice. Tyla's chest tightened. She turned back to Vecren, her voice steady. I'm not weak. Vecren's eyes narrowed. Then prove it. The fight for freedom. The attack happened in an instant. Vecren moved first, a blade flashing in his hand. Daniel blocked it with his forearm, the impact sending a sharp crack through the air. Tyla fired her pulse rifle, but the commander was too fast. He twisted out of the way, striking Daniel in the ribs. Daniel grunted, but he didn't fall. He grabbed Vecren by the throat and slammed him into the control panel. Alarms blared. The ship trembled. Vecren snarled. You think you can escape? Daniel's voice was calm, cold, final. We already have. Then, with one swift motion, he drove his knife into Vecren's chest. The commander's golden eyes widened in shock. Then he slumped. Dead. Tyla stood frozen. It was over. Just like that. She had never seen death happen so fast. She swallowed hard and turned to Daniel. Are you okay? He wiped blood from his lip and smirked. I've had worse. Tyla shook her head. Humans are insane. Daniel winked. You're just figuring that out now. Freedom at a cost. With Vecren dead, the ship's systems were now under their control. Tyla moved to the controls, fingers flying across the screen. She had been trained in Velora technology her whole life. Now, for the first time, she was using that knowledge for herself. The ship's thrusters powered up. Daniel leaned over her shoulder. Think you can fly this thing? Tyla smirked. Watch me. The engines roared. The ship lurched forward, breaking away from the human vessel. Tyla's heart pounded. She had done it. She had betrayed her people. She had saved a human. And now she was one of them. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if she could ever go back. But when she glanced at Daniel and saw the way he was watching her, with respect, not control, she knew she had made the right choice. Because humans weren't monsters. They were something far more dangerous. They were free. And now, so was she.